working with Lisa. She's a firecracker, and the folks that she interacts with are always amazing folks. So thank y'all for having me in here this evening and spending a little time with me. Lisa asked me to do a class on organics, and that can mean a lot of different things, but usually it's what folks want to know: how do you manage pest and disease in an organic garden? So we'll focus on some of that tonight and some of the products that are available for you to manage pests that are approved for organic use.
Mark, I think that microphone is on.
Okay.
It's under the bag. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not much of a performer, so we'll make it work. We'll try. I have to walk around though, so I might have to sit up with me. All right, is that better? All right, good deal. Okay, please, if you have questions as we go along, raise your hand or just speak out and let me know what questions you have, and we'll answer them as we go through it. I think we've got about an hour plus a few minutes, and I've got plenty of material. So I want to make sure that I'm answering your questions more than giving you a presentation. I can stand up here and talk all night, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get the answer to your question. So don't hesitate to ask, and I'll be glad to tell you what I do know, and there's plenty of stuff I don't know, so we'll figure it out together. When we talk about an integrated pest management system, we're looking at three main concepts. And the first one is cultural controls, and so that's things that we can do before and after the season to help manage pests. So it's things like crop rotations, and so not planting your tomatoes in the same place every year so that the disease that was present in the last season is there again where your tomatoes are. Or same idea with pests. Pests are feeding on a particular crop. If you can move that crop away from that area, then you're going to have less pest pressure. With small production, smaller gardens, that can be a real challenge. The crop rotations can be, so we look for other ways to manage pests as well. So the second thing is mechanical controls, and that can be as simple as going out and knocking bugs off your plant into a bucket of soapy water, or using some material like this. So this is insect netting. So it's a lot like mosquito netting or something like that, but this will keep the bugs off of your plants. This is a really valuable tool if you're growing like cole crops, cabbage and broccoli and kale and stuff like that, because most of our pests for those crops fly onto the plant. And so if you can keep that moth off of your plant, it can't lay eggs, and then the larvae or the caterpillars can't eat your cabbage. So this is a mechanical means for controlling those pests. And then the final one is chemical controls. And so that's utilizing products that are approved for organic use in our program. Some folks use stuff that's not approved, and I don't fault you, you're growing good food. So don't see this as a judgment, it's just the type of program that we operate. And we'll go through some of those here tonight. And we'll talk about some of the basic equipment we can use and how to use it and how frequently, that sort of thing. So I've been through some of this stuff already, so I'm going to move on. So this is one of the cultural controls examples. So these are different plots in a garden. That can be an acre plot, it can be 10 square feet. The size is kind of irrelevant. But what you're doing this year is say you have these 4 plots, and you've got greens here, beans, fruits, and roots. That makes it easy to remember: green, beans, fruits, and roots. And so the next year you're going to want to rotate those forward. So you'll see that this root here, in last year, it's over here in plot 1 the next year. So this is just a simple example of how a crop rotation works. So our beans are moving over one to plot 3 in the next year, and so on. Some of our crops are heavier feeders than others, and generally our greens and our fruits, so tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, They're going to be heavier feeders than your beans and roots. And so on those years, you're going to add compost or fertilizer. You're probably going to add fertilizer every year, but you want to do something to improve the soil, the access to food for your soil biology on those heavy feeding years. So companion planting is another common way that folks help manage pests and disease in the garden. And what that means is you're using, see if I can multitask here. You're using other plants that either bring in beneficial insects or discourage the pest insects that you're dealing with that you don't want in the garden. So growing stuff like cilantro and lavender, basil, things that are real fragrant, they tend to attract beneficial insects, things that are going to eat the pests that you have, and they're going to discourage the pests that you don't want in the garden. And you can plant that throughout your garden area. Planting flowers around your production area is beneficial because again, it's going to bring in the pollinators, which are going to help pollinate your fruiting crops. Or your production that requires pollination. And so those are also beneficial to your production, but those flowers also bring in beneficial insects as well. And then having a lot of different types of plants is beneficial not only to the soil, but the beneficial insects that you have in your area. Your soil life needs to have a diversity of food available and root systems available to interact with that a diverse soil life. And the healthier your soil is, the healthier your plants are going to be, and the better they're going to produce for you. And a healthy plant is better able to defend itself against pest and disease pressures. Another cultural control is housekeeping in the garden. So one of the most important things you can do in managing pests and disease in the garden is go out and look and see what's going on. Go out and turn leaves over. So you want to be able to identify those pest symptoms or disease symptoms as early as possible. You want to see when a plant is deteriorating and try to identify why that is. Is it something as simple as needing some water, or is it started showing signs of that disease pressure? When you're turning over your leaves, you're looking for these little larvae crawling around on the back, or egg sacs. And I've got some other pictures that we might be able to see the egg sacs better in. But so you want to see when those things are changing in the garden. So it's critical to go out there and take a look at what's going on. So I mentioned that soil health is a critical factor to the long-term production in your garden. The healthier our soil is, the healthier the plants are going to be. That means it's going to produce better food for you, and it's going to be able to defend itself better from the pest and disease that we're dealing with. So I showed a picture of eggplant because I don't know how many people eat eggplant. Minority, but yeah. Eggplant usually gets riddled by flea beetles pretty early on. So if you don't have a vigorous and healthy plant, it's going to have a hard time getting out of that transplant stage if you have any flea beetle pressure. One of the ways we can understand what's going on with our soil health is to get our soil test, and I think most everybody does that. I recommend you do it at least every other year, but if you're in any kind of heavy production rotation, you should go ahead and get it done each year. So we look at a couple of things on our soil test. We're looking at our pH. Oh, there it is, soil pH. Our pH is critical for our plants to be able to take up the nutrients out of the soil. So you're looking for a soil pH for general vegetable gardens somewhere around like 6.2 to 6.8. Somewhere in that range, you're in pretty good shape for just about all of your vegetable crops. Something like blueberries, you really want an acidic soil, so you want that number to be much lower. But for general vegetable production, you're looking in that 6 range for your pH. And in that range, it can have access to all the major nutrients that it needs, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, things like that. So it's just one of the tools that we use. Focusing on organic matter content. So I don't know if y'all can see that little 2.72 down there at the bottom. So that tells you how much stable organic matter there is in the soil. And that organic matter is what the soil biology feeds on, along with the worms and all the stuff that we can see, but also the stuff that we can't see that's in there feeding. It also provides nutrients to your plants. So if you don't have organic matter, that means you're trying to support your plant with vitamins, basically. It's trying to live your life just on vitamins alone. And we're just not going to have a healthy outcome if that's what we're doing. So over time, we want to see that organic matter content increase. So it's good to get that measurement, and a lot of times you'll have to ask for that specifically through the extension office. They generally can test for it, but it's probably not part of their standard soil test. So if that's something that interests you and you want to track that, make sure to ask them about that extra measurement, that extra step.
Question.
Yes?
You were talking about the pH on the soil, 6.2, 6.8. Mine, by the thing, was 5.08. How will I raise that up to where it needs to be? Just fertilizer or
It'd probably be lime.
lime?
Yeah, and different sources of lime will have will impact the soil in different ways, basically. And so if you'll ask the extension what they recommend for how much lime to increase, because the local mines generally provide lime. It may depend on what quarry it's coming from, how reactive it is. So if you could ask the extension office what the local quarry is providing and how much of that you need to add to bring your pH up to what you need.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Good question though.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Do you till that into the soil, or can you just sprinkle it around?
It needs to be turned in the soil because it needs to react with the moisture that's in the soil. So if you leave it on the surface, it'll take a really long time for it to actually start to impact the soil. It's a slow process anyway. So, you know, if you can test your soil in the fall and you see that you have lower pH, that's kind of the ideal time to go ahead and get that lime mixed in, because sometimes it can take up to 3 months before it actually shows real impact on your pH number. All right. So we're going to talk about some of the mechanical controls. I'll bring some of these because I summarize as I go along. I got lots of slides, but I just want to make sure I highlight the important points here. So physical barriers like the insect netting, we talked about that. Biological controls, so that's like bringing in something like ladybugs to help manage a pest problem. It doesn't really work in an outside production system. If you're in a high tunnel or a greenhouse and you're having pest issues, you can put insect netting around that structure and it can keep those beneficial insects that you just paid a lot of money for shipping on. It'll keep them in that structure. But if you let them go in your garden, they're going to go wherever they want. Yeah, they'll stick around for a day or two, but then they'll be gone. And it's an expensive thing to learn. So tillage is a way to manage. Mechanical means for managing pest and disease. Some of our pests overwinter in the soil, and so by disturbing that soil, it brings them up to the surface and makes them accessible to like birds and voles and things like that that'll eat the larvae and the grubs. So it's kind of stirring that house up. You want to have minimal soil disturbance, but in most of our gardens, we're going to need some tillage until we have really high organic matter. So when we're working with 3% organic matter, we've got a lot more clay material in there than we have organic matter. So during that phase, you're going to have to use some mechanical means to get some tilt in your soil. So these are some of our common bugs, pests that we deal with. So this one over here that looks like a ladybug is actually a bean beetle. So for all of these, for all of these, the adults are generally not eating a lot. And I'll go ahead and bring some of the other names up on here. It's the larvae that are eating the lion's share. They're doing the lion's share of the damage on your plants. So we'll move forward here in a second and look at some of the larvae. But when you see the adults on the plants, you need to think about making sure that you're prepared, if you're going to use a chemical product, that you're prepared to have that available at that point. Because once they lay eggs on the plant and the larvae start feeding, that's the key time to have that product on the plant so that the larva consumes that product. If you don't want to use chemical controls, something like this insect netting where you're preventing access to the plant is kind of, it's really valuable. It's kind of expensive. It's about $1 a foot. So if you were trying to cover a 50-foot bed, it's about $50. But it lasts. I've had the same roll for probably 5 or 6 years. It's a little discolored, but it works. It's not destroyed or anything. There's a different material called rope cover, and it's kind of like fabric softener sheets with the consistency. And that helps with temperature control on top of your plants. And it does help with some pest stuff. But I get frustrated with it because when the wind blows, it can just tear it all to pieces. And it's really frustrating to walk out there and see it strung across the garden. And you have to go put it back on. But this insect netting is much more durable and will last multiple years. And it's a real value to any crop that doesn't need to be pollinated. So all of your cold crops, your cabbage and cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower, things like that, you don't need any pollinators on those, so you can cover them up and leave them covered until you're ready to harvest pretty much. Rain can go through it, that sort of thing. So it's something that I love and I share it. I'm pretty upfront about it. Obviously, I've only mentioned it about a dozen times so far. But it's a valuable product for dealing with these. So just about all of these, let's see, probably everything but the squash bug flies into the garden. So this material, once it comes into the garden, it's landing on this, and this is not what they want to lay eggs on. And so they're going to move on. Are y'all familiar with all these bugs? A little bit. It's in.
Where do you get that?
Johnny Seed sells it. Grow Appalachia sells it in Maria. Martin's Produce over in Liberty sells it. There's a lot of different places. I can get some locations to Lisa or whoever can distribute that. Yes.
Mark, I ordered mine on Amazon.
Okay. Yeah.
Fairly decent price on it.
And you got a decent price on it? Is that what you said?
I think so.
Yeah.
I
The main brand is Protect Netting, but I'm sure that there's been some other brands come about since it came out. And yeah, you can just about find anything on Amazon anymore. Y'all have problems with squash vine borers?
Yes.
Yeah. Those are a nightmare for me. You can use this insect netting to manage those, but what you have to do is either go in and hand pollinate your pumpkins and squash and stuff, which if you're growing on a large scale is a real challenge. But if you've got a smaller yard garden where you've just got 50 foot of bed, you can keep the vine borer off of the plant with this material. You just got to go in and hand pollinate. What some folks will do is leave it on until all the flowers are set, and then they'll take it off and let the pollinators get in there and do their thing, and then cover it back up. But yeah, I hate vine borers. So here's some of the larvae that we're going to be looking for. This is that little bean larva, and this is what their little egg sacs look like. They're always a little cluster. Sometimes they're real shiny and gold, depending on which of the pests we're dealing with, and sometimes they're yellow or orange. The orange is the potato beetle. So this is when we want to have that, if we're using a chemical control, that's when we want to have it on the plant, because those little things will eat up leaves overnight. And when they do that, they're going to be consuming some of these products that I brought for examples, and so it'll kill them. We'll talk more about the products, but with any chemical product, you have to treat it like it could injure yourself or your family or your animals. So you always want to treat them with respect and read the label. That's the most critical thing. Read and understand the label. If you don't understand the label, call Extension, reach out to me. Let's make sure that we all understand how to use the product safely. These are little potato beetles, squash bugs. The little flea beetles are trouble because they can overwinter in the soil. So this material isn't as effective on them if you've had flea beetles in the past. Insect netting. I recommend using that. All right, so this is the row cover I was talking about. These are conduit hoops. There's a spring steel hoop that's a bit smaller, but it's a lot less expensive. Conduit has gotten pretty expensive over the past few years. Those spring steel hoops, they're not quite as tall as these are, but they're only about 70 cents a piece, where these can cost you like $10 a piece now. There's different weights of this material, so the thickness of the material, which also equals durability. But there's a trade-off, because the thicker the material, the less light is going through to the plant. And so, if you're trying to manage temperature swings, like if you're trying to get up crops really early, the heavier stuff is beneficial, but you're going to have to go out during the day and open up that stuff because you're not getting good sunlight in. So these are those beneficial insects I said you could buy and put in the garden. One of the only companies that are doing these is Arbico Organics. But again, the major issue with these is, one, you lose them if you put them in an open field. And two, the shipping is really expensive because they have to overnight them to you. So it's kind of cost prohibitive to use these, but I like to bring them up because some people are interested in them. All right, so chemical controls. There's a lot of home remedies. You can find all kind of mixtures online of stuff that folks have come up with. I'm not going to make any of those recommendations because none of that stuff is labeled for use like that. So in general, you might think it's safe, and it may be, and if you've got something that works for you, I'm not going to tell you not to use it. But I just can't share those with you. Liability issues. So when we talk about approved for organic, there's well, you're not going to be able to see it, but if you come up here and look, there's a little symbol on there that has the letters OMRI. That's the Organic Materials Research Institute. And they're an independent body that takes products and does tests on them and assesses what their chemical components are. And they either then label the product not to be used for organic production, used for organics, or used with some sort of restriction. So with all of our products, we want to make sure that we're reading the label, we understand how to use it, and when it makes sense to go back in the garden. And we'll talk about that re-entry period here in a few minutes. So these are some of the main products that we use, or that we recommend. This product is spinosad. Monterey is the company. There's other spinosad products, but this is kind of ideal for home gardeners. I think I've got some up here. And y'all are welcome to come up and take a look at these as we wrap up. Yeah, this is the spinosad product. And then this next one is BT. A big word that I can't pronounce, Bacillus thuringiensis. close, but these are really good for controlling caterpillars. There's a liquid option, the BT. This Dipel is this brand, but we have a Monterey brand that's already pre-mixed. And you can just mix that with water. You mix the powder with water as well, so that's generally more expensive because it treats a lot more area. These products, this is about $17, and for a 5,000 square foot garden, that should last you all year. And this is probably about $18 or $20, and again, it should last you pretty much all year. This product here is called Pyganic. It's a pyrethrum based product, and it's made from the roots of chrysanthemums, so relatives of marigolds and things like that. And it's a neurotoxin, and so it's kind of the seven dust of the organic world. It works on a lot of different bugs, but that includes your pollinators too. It will kill whatever happens to it. Once it's dry, it's not as dangerous. Once it's dry on the plant, but if you spray a bug with it, or a bee, or butterfly, or whatever, it's going to kill it. It being a neurotoxin, it can also affect mammals, and I think we're mammals as far as I know. So you don't want to have this around kids. You don't want them to have access to this and accidentally consume it or get it on their hands and put their hands in their mouth, that sort of thing. The same with your animals, if you've got dogs or cats. Yes?
Free-range chickens, will it affect them if it's on the ground?
Probably not, unless they're in the garden where you just sprayed it and they're going in there and pecking on stuff and pulling it out. I don't think it's being exposed because they've got the feathers. It probably wouldn't be as bad for them, but I would still treat it with caution. But I think you could use it in the same area as your chickens. I wouldn't want to spray it on the chickens for any kind of control, like if they had mites or something. I don't think this is the right treatment. But it's a good product, and if you have a major infestation of something, it's kind of like the nuclear option. It'll take care of it, but you want to use it with occasionally, not all the time. This one on the end down here, so the azadirachtin is the neem oil, and a lot of people have heard of neem oil, and this is just the active ingredient in neem oil, and they have it mixed with pyrethrin because their mode of action or the way that they kill the pest are different. So it's kind of like applying two products at the same time, and it reduces the ability for the insect to be resistant to any chemical pesticide. So if we use these too often and too regular, eventually the insects will survive through a treatment and they'll become resistant to that chemical. And so we want to try to prevent that by using each of these occasionally. And so I encourage you to have at least two products on hand, just so that you can alternate which chemical you're using or alternate which mode of action you're using to manage the bugs. Yes, sir.
When you're talking about these and using them on plants, are you talking about all the plants in general? If I go out and I've got some corn and then I've got the tomatoes, I'm doing the corn and the wind blowing and it's blowing from the corn over on the tomatoes or, other plants like that. Is that going to affect it? Is it going to harm it in any way, or is it just kind of like a little added protection or everything?
I guess it would just be added protection. It's not going to damage any plants. There can be concern for pollinators if they're present. If you're spraying it, it's drifting with the wind.
Yeah.
But you're not going to damage other plants with it.
When would be the best time? I know you probably answered it, but when would when they're blooming, or just after they come up, or when they are flowering for the bugs to come in? Would that be the best time to do it?
So really you want to use, these are specifically for insects. So we'll talk about disease in a minute, but with insects, you want to use these products when the insect is there that's eating. So it's generally the larva, the little grub, the little bug that's on there. When they're on there feeding, that's when you want this product. You don't really want to just spray it randomly, or, you know, like some folks will just put 7 on every week, you know, every weekend or something like that. That works over the long run, but you're not really targeting dealing with the insect when it's feeding. You're kind of just trying to throw a blanket over it, hoping that it continues to work. So, and it'll save you money if you use them more targeted like that, because if you just spray them every week, you're going to run through your product unnecessarily. Yep. All right, so this is malathion, which is a pretty common conventional. When I say conventional, it just means that it's not approved for organic use. So it's more common. You're likely to find a conventional product at local farm stores. They've started carrying more organic because I think there's more demand for organic controls too. But this is an example of what your days to reentry and your days to harvest look like. So when we look at the label, we want to look at what crop that we're trying to manage. And like your question with corn and tomatoes, your application rate is going to be different depending on which crop you're actually trying to treat. There we go. And then your rates. So this is listed per acre. And so if you've got a 1,000 square foot garden, that means you've got to divide this by 43.5 or something like that. So anyway, you've got to cut this rate down to what your scale of garden is, the size of your garden. This is the maximum number of applications per year. So to prevent resistance in the insects, it's telling you that you can only use this 6 times a year, or is what the manufacturer recommends. Generally, that's not something we look at, and people just use them when we see bugs in the garden. So we'll make sure that we're looking at that. And then the pre-harvest interval days. So this one's a 7. So that means that once you apply this, then you should not be harvesting edible portions of that crop for 7 days after. Prior to that 7 days, it's still a health risk for you and whoever's going to eat that food. And then it also has a restricted entry number of days. So once you spray in the garden, you're not supposed to go back in with this product for 2 days, which could be a real issue, especially in community gardens, where you don't really have control of who's going to be there and when and that sort of thing. So if you have a school garden where kids are coming and going, you probably don't want to use these types of products because they could be dangerous. For example, with the organic controls, the re-entry period is usually 0, so you can go back in the same day. And the pre-harvest date is usually either 0 or 1, so you can harvest the same day or the next day. So if the organic products work for you, they're much more easier to manage. All right, so covering what you asked about, sir, you want to apply it when the active feeders are present in the garden. Always read the label and have different products on hand so you can change the mode of action. How we do on time? Pretty good. Anybody have any questions about the chemical controls for tests before we move forward? All right. We won't spend too much time on here, but this is a disease triangle. And so when you're managing for disease in the garden, there's 3 main areas that affect whether or not your plant is susceptible to disease or not. So the host is whatever crop you have. So if you've got cabbage, or we'll use tomatoes because of the disease pressure. So if you've got tomatoes and you're growing them in this area, you're going to know that they're going to have some susceptibility to blight because blight is very common in this area. So you already know that before you put it in the ground. So your host is already open to becoming sick with that disease. And then the environment that you're growing it in. So are you growing it in a garden that has had blight in the past? Do you have a neighbor nearby that has had a lot of issues with blight and disease in their tomatoes? If you know that, then you're going to know that you're going to have the same pressure. Another environmental thing is the health of your soil. So is your soil really healthy, and then which makes your plants healthy, which makes them more stronger to defend themselves against the disease. And then the pathogen, which is the disease itself. So are there ways to deal with the blights and the bacterial issues that tomato may deal with? So you kind of take all these together and try to find the center point where you can get enough production, your disease pressure is low enough, you can have quality fruit, and you've got healthy soil, and the environment is appropriate for growing that crop. So just like with the pest controls, we use those same three concepts of cultural controls, mechanical controls, and chemical controls. So some of this is repetition, so I'm going to skip through some of these so we make sure we get you all the good information. So scouting, again, is really critical for disease management. We want to know when our plants are starting to decline. With disease, it's harder to identify some of the diseases. So it's good to have a relationship with the extension office. So if you start seeing signs of what looks like disease, especially things like these water-soaked spots that have concentric rings, that have multiple rings on them, when you start getting these speckled leaves, that's a pretty extreme. You hope you don't get to there. If you start to see leaves starting to droop and kind of look wet, you want to try to identify that disease as quickly as possible. So if there's an option for preserving your crop, you can find out what you can use to treat that particular disease. And most extension offices have access to a plant diagnostic lab, so they have to send them off. But they may even be able to identify the disease before they send it, because they probably see a lot of them. But they would still send it off to the diagnostic center just to make sure that it's the disease that you think it is. And there are different ways to deal with different diseases. With organic controls, it's more of you're trying to create an environment that the disease doesn't want to be on the plant, because it's not systemic, the controls that we use. And so that just means that it doesn't get into the vascular system of the plant. With conventional controls, the chemicals can actually get inside the plant, and that's what makes them so effective. But my concern with doing that is then you're eating that stuff that's inside the plant as well, just like the insect is. So with the organic chemical controls, it's more about preventing disease than curing disease. You really can't cure disease in an organic garden. You can only prolong the life of that plant, but you can prevent your plant from getting disease. Crop rotation, garden maintenance is always important. See, this garden's nice and clean. With disease control, a lot of the vectors, the disease vectors, the things that allow the disease to transfer from one plant to the other, can be airborne or soil-borne. So you want to remove that diseased plant from the garden and either burn it or bag it up and send it to the landfill. Because most home garden, if you're composting at home, most of the compost piles don't get hot enough in like a home scale system to kill the disease vector. And so you want to get that stuff away from your plant, your garden area, and either burn it or take it far enough where it's not going to impact your garden area, or send it to the landfill. So mechanical controls, something that's become really popular definitely in Kentucky. are high tunnels, and I think they're getting more popular in Tennessee. Is that fair? There's a lot of resources through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They have a cost share program to help pay for high tunnels, mainly for market producers. There's a whole ranking process. If y'all are interested in any of that information, I'll be glad to pass them that along. Physical barriers like the insect netting. It doesn't help as much with disease control because the bacterial and the fungal spores are so small that they can go right through that material. Trellising is another good management technique because you're getting your crops and your leaves up off the ground. So for tomatoes example, make sure that you've got them trellised up. A lot of folks use baskets, but you want to prune those lower leaves off as the plant grows because the transfer of the disease is generally from the soil to the leaf. On the bottom of the leaf, there's some little, if you looked at them through a microscope, they look like little mouths on the back of the leaves, and that allows the plant to breathe, essentially, like help manage its temperature. But it also is an opening for those bacteria or fungal spores to get into the plant and cause a disease. So if you can move those leaves up farther from the ground, where you're not going to have soil splash up onto the plant, it's going to help you better manage the disease pressure. It encourages airflow, keeps your leaves dry, which is another benefit of a high tunnel. Your leaves stay dry inside the high tunnel, so you have less disease pressure in the tunnel. For cucumbers, both the striped cucumber beetle and the spotted cucumber beetle can transfer bacterial wilt. And so if you've had cucumbers in the past that they look great one day and then the next day most of the vine is dead and drooping down, that's bacterial wilt. It's pretty difficult to control because what happens is when they feed on one plant and they fly over to another one and they feed on that plant, they're transferring the disease from one to the other through their saliva. The cucumbers generally have to be pollinated, so you can use the insect netting for a while. It doesn't work as well with chemical controls, like trying to kill the cucumber beetle, because the one time that they bite that plant is enough to transfer the disease. So if they die after biting it, they still have possibly transferred the disease. There are some cucumbers that don't have to be pollinated, and if you try it, they grow just fine, they just don't taste as good. So if your goal is to have lots of cucumbers and not much disease, you can opt for that and grow it under the insect netting. But that's not why we grow food. We want it to taste good and enjoy it. There's some bamboo trellising, and trellising also provides the benefit of being able to scout your plants and be able to see what's going on the plant itself by getting it up higher. Bush beans are great and they're pretty disease resistant, but in order to look at it, you got to bend over and move the plant around a bit to see what's going on. So the trellising helps get your plant up high enough so there's airflow, less access for the disease or the pest without you being able to notice. We use this Hortonova netting pretty often. Are y'all familiar with the Hortonova? It's a plastic material. It looks like a farm fence, but it's just made of plastic or spun plastic. It works great for beans trellising. It's cheap and you can put a lot of it out really fast. So I think there's a roll of like 2,200 feet and it's like $150. They sell it in smaller amounts, but anyway, it's a quick way to get up a bean trellis. And it's pretty inexpensive, and as long as you take care of it, it'll last multiple years. Cattle panels. One person in here uses cattle panels, or used to. Doug back there. The upfront cost is a little high, but they last forever, and they're great for trellis and stuff on. All right, who prunes their tomatoes? Anybody?
Prunes?
prunes, yeah,
Like Chico,
a little bit.
just to pick the suckers
The suckers, yeah, suckers and pruning the lower leaves as well. This is the Florida weave. I don't know, I tend to get cheap and I only want to put the T-post every like 5 or 6 plants, and that doesn't hold them up very well. But what you want to do is drive T-post. I think what they're demonstrating here are wooden stakes, and y'all might have more access to like 2x2 stock that could be used for that. But basically what you do is you weave your tomato twine in between. You can use baling twine, it's pretty inexpensive and readily available. But it kind of squeezes the plant into a manageable row and keeps it growing upright and allows you to be able to see it, scout around the plant easier. And again, it achieves of getting those plants up off the ground and getting some airflow through there. If you're in a high tunnel, you can use what's called the tomahawk hook. It's called that because of this little contraption that hangs up inside the high tunnel or the greenhouse on the purlins that run inside. And in this system, you just use a little hook, a little clasp with a string, and that keeps a single vine of your tomatoes going up that vine. It's not really applicable to outdoor gardening. So when we're pruning tomatoes, we talked about these little suckers. If you prune those back, it's going to reduce the number of fruit clusters you have, which are the little flower clusters. So you're going to have a more manageable plant. And your plant will be able to focus on those flowers that are still on the plant. So you'll have better quality fruit and roughly the same production, whether you have a really bushy tomato or a single vine tomato or a single leader. So this here is a leader, is what they call it, or a vine. And so each one of these suckers will create a new vine or a new leader. And so if you let the suckers go, you might end up with 20 leaders on your tomato plant. Some people like it because it makes the plant look really big and bushy. But the research and in my experience with both systems is you roughly get the same amount of tomatoes, the same weight, but with the pruned tomato, they're going to be of higher quality and a little larger than the bigger, bushier plants.
Questions?
Yes?
What would you recommend, like just looking at this picture right here, how would you prune?
So we'll call this a fruit set or a flower cluster. For me, I'm going to remove everything below the last flower cluster. So you won't produce new flower clusters down at the bottom below this point. They'll just continue coming out at the top of the leader. Everybody hear me okay? And so what I would do, this whole limb would be gone, this one would be gone, this one would be gone. So as it rises, as it goes up, the stem is bare below that last flower cluster. It's really shocking when you don't grow your tomatoes like that. It looks like you're killing your tomato. It looks pretty funky. But what happens is your canopy up here is what's gathering all the light. These aren't, as the tomato gets bigger, these are getting shaded out and they're not providing much benefit as far as photosynthesis or providing nutrients through the sunlight. The same with these suckers can still pop out below those with or without the limb. Did I hear a question? Okay. Is that?
Yes. Thank you.
I think I've got a picture in here. So the suckers, those are pretty common. People are familiar with those. When they're small, you can just pop them off. Really, you can pop them off about any time. I use a little pair of pruners because I'm with little needle nose pruners, just so keep my hands from turning green. And so I guess here's a better image of that. So as the plant goes up, your fruit clusters up here, you can remove all this material down here. Especially if it's trellis, you really don't want to. If you're doing that on a plant that's not trellis, the top's going to be so heavy it's going to fall over and break your stem. But you want to make sure it's trellised if you're going to grow it like that. And same thing. All right, so some of the disease management components or products. So this is Cueva. This isn't generally available in smaller containers like these because it's for larger area production. So this gallon I think is around $120. But it'll, depending on the scale of your production, it'll last you for years. I've had that one for about 4 years because I don't grow a ton of tomatoes. But it's a copper soap essentially, and you apply it about every 10 days. So where with the chemical, with the pest control, I told you want to apply it in the feeding, because disease and fungal and bacterial diseases can come in on the wind. You want to kind of create a protective cover on your plant. And so you'll spray that copper on there about every 10 days, and it'll make the surface of the leaves inhospitable to the bacterial and fungal spores. And you should use it consistently every 10 days. If you have really heavy rains, it'll wash off, so you might have to apply it more often than that. But it really creates a great barrier for your tomato plants for dealing with blight. I would say you probably get an additional 20% production if you have really high blight pressure issues. And where we are in East Central Kentucky, our blight pressure is really high. So if we don't spray, they're going to get diseased. So it's a good product, but there's another product. See if I got it on here. So double nickel is also a bacterial control. So it's a soil-borne bacteria that is competitive with the diseases that you're dealing with. And it's a powder. I think this is priced around $30 now, something like that. So it's reasonable and it covers a large area. And then Serenade, which is this little red container I have here. And that is about, I don't know, about $17 or $18 these days. So it's a good scale. It works well. It's another bacterial. You can see here in the name. I know you can't see it right now, but we see bacillus in the first part of the name. It's a bacterial control. All right, so let's wrap up disease management. I think we're probably pretty close on time. So again, always read the labels. If you're trying to control a specific disease, make sure you understand how the label recommends that you do that for your application rates. Don't let kids play with your disease control products. I guess an important thing that the reason I highlighted this is some of these products only work well when you mix it with water between a pH of 6 and 8. So if you see that these products aren't working for you, you may want to check the pH of the water you're using and see whether if it's acidic or basic or alkaline, because that may be the problem. But it's mainly with these biological controls like the Serenade. The pH of the water can cause it not to provide the same benefit as it normally would. See, we always want to look at our days of harvest and our re-entry period to be safe and make sure that we're not either getting something on our skin that may transfer to another family member, or we're eating something that's going to be dangerous for us or for our kids or grandkids. All right, I think that was a marathon, but I think that's it. What questions do y'all have?
I have one in reference to weeds, I guess would be a good one. I haven't been able to work my garden because I had a bad accident back in 2000. But my garden was taken over completely with weeds, basically almost everything we had. Is there something that can be put in the ground in the fall or when you first start tilling the ground that will help control these weeds, or will that also inhibit your plants? That's the one thing that I.
So it's not a true for organic use, but there's a pre-emergence that are available for aren't improved for organic production, but they prevent seeds from germinating, basically. They use it a lot in the landscaping industry, so they put it in flower beds so that if weed seeds get dropped in there by birds and whatever, those seeds won't germinate. You can use a product like that, but I don't know if it's labeled for use in an edible garden, in a garden that you're getting food out of. If you're looking for an organic control, depending on the size of the garden, can y'all still hear me back there? I got away from the microphone. If you're using it in a garden, I would say there's less than 5,000 square feet. What we find most efficient to use for organic management is tarping. And so you can take like a big silage tarp and put that out on the garden. You can do it before and after you till. When you till, you're going to bring weed seeds up and they're going to want to germinate. So if you have that tarp laid down, and those seeds will still germinate, but they won't have access to light, so they'll die. And the same for if you've already got a bunch of weeds, or even if you're trying to turn sod into garden. If you put that tarp down, you'll kill all that grass off, and it won't be nearly as hard to till and get to a tilt where you can actually work the soil. A lot of organic producers are using the tarping system, and it works really well. Some folks, if you know somebody that works with like the billboard companies, that vinyl tarp is usually free. They usually have a bunch of cutoffs when they pull the old tarps down. So that's a free resource if you can find them. They do get really heavy. I would say around a 30 by 50 gets really hard for one person to drag around, especially if you got any water on it or anything like that. So just keep that in mind when you're deciding how big you want to use it, because it can be a challenge to move around.
So let's talk about the tarps, I know what you mean.
Right.
60 pounds up to 140 pounds for one tarp, so.
And those tarps would probably work, yeah, because they've probably got UV, they won't break down in the sun, I don't think.
No.
And that's what you're looking at. So if you get like regular construction plastic, you don't want to use clear necessarily, but construction plastic doesn't have a UV inhibitor, and so if you leave it in the garden too long, it'll fracture like glass, and you'll just have all these little pieces of plastic all over the garden. So you want to make sure you use a product that has a UV inhibitor in it so it doesn't break down in the garden. And the silage tarps that they use mainly out west are good for that. There's a company called Farmer's Friend that's in Tennessee, but I'm not sure what city they're in. But they sell silage tarps, pretty good size, like 50 to 150 foot long. The shipping on silage tarps is high because, just like he said, you know, they may be 100 pounds, and UPS doesn't want to haul them if they're much over that. So shipping can be pretty high, but Farmer's Friend's a good company to work with. A lot of people are using them. If you're looking for a spray control for weeds and organic systems, really the only thing there is a really high percentage vinegar. It's like 30%, and it works pretty well. It smells like you've dumped a bunch of pickles out in the yard or something, but it works. Some people use it for along fence lines and stuff like that, but it's a little expensive. And you'll have some organic fertilizer outside. I don't know how that distribution is going to work.
Some of them already got it, the rest of them had an opportunity after.
Okay. All right. Any other questions that come to mind?
Sir, what is your mixture in your sprayer there, as far as organic? What is your mixture?
Like, what's the ratio?
Yes, sir.
So it changes for each product, but for the spinosas, it's like an ounce to a gallon. And I think the smaller one is, I guess that's 8 ounces, and then the bigger one's a pint. So that's a good thing to mix. And let me say one thing about these sprayers. You can obviously get them in any size, you know, like the backpack sprayers or garden sprayers. But if you're using it in your home garden, or even a larger market garden, make sure you get one with a tip this angle so that you can spray under the leaves. It's so much easier to do it. If you've got a straight wand, you kind of have to like put the wand like that. So if you've got a little angle, it's easier to get under there and spray the bottom of the leaves. And that's really important because a lot of times they're laying their eggs on the bottom side of the leaves. And so that's where they're feeding. So you want to make sure that you get it sprayed under there really well. Yes?
On the pH, what if it's 7 point something? How do we bring it back down?
There's acid that you can use to bring them down. Best thing to do is ask the extension office what product they recommend locally to bring it down. A lot of times it's sulfur, but you may have some other sources here depending on the vines.
One more question, about getting the soil sample. How long does it take to get the sample? Can you bring it up there and get it then? Do they test it right then?
Generally, no. I don't know of any labs where you can really have it assessed the same day. Okay. And extension has different pressures, different times of the year. So like right now, folks are sending in a lot of soil samples. So the university lab is going to take longer to process them because there's more coming through. So the extension office has to generally box those up and send them to main campus somewhere. There are some private companies you can get a quicker turnaround. We use Waters Ag, which is out in western Kentucky. They mainly do soil testing for like big commodity corn, soybean operations. And we can generally get a test back within about 7 working days. With extension in Kentucky, you're probably looking at probably this time of year about 3 weeks, and sometimes it can go even longer. So it's really good to be able to get that fall one because one, people aren't asking for soil samples as much in the fall. They're ready to wrap everything up. But if you have a problem with like pH, if you know that in the fall, you can add that lime or sulfur, and it has time to work in the soil before you start planting your spring crops. So I don't know about Tennessee. Do you know what the average is?
It's about a week or two, kind of in the busy times. It can take about 2 weeks. I know that our local co-op will do soil samples though.
That's what's
Yeah, local co-op will do it. And they say that their samples are a little bit easier to read than ours. Ours are just a lot more in depth. But if anybody has questions about their soil samples and wants me to simplify it for them, either just come by the office, send me an email, just call, whatever. I'll help you out however I can. But yeah, co-ops are normally pretty easy to read. And I don't know how long their time frame is though, but I think it's about kind of the same as ours is, like a week or two, just depending.
Well, that's good. If right now y'all are a week or two out, that's pretty quick.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Kentucky's took that long.
Yeah, I think it's because they only use the UK main campus in Lexington.
Ours have to go to Nashville, so.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if y'all could use Knoxville or...
Knoxville has one, but the Nashville, their testing center is huge. So they can take a lot more than the Knoxville one can.
Yes.
You can also send them to Michigan State. They'll also do soil samples and they're pretty good about getting right back.
Yeah, some of them, probably they send you an email with the results. Yeah, and that makes it a lot quicker too, because a lot of extension offices, they'll get the results emailed back to the office, and then the office usually works on the sheet that actually goes to the producer.
Ours, they email it out and sometimes they'll mail it out, but I know they got free soil samples this time, but half of the people, they didn't put it in right. So I have them here, but they never got them. So that's one thing that I'll talk to y'all about after.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, they're supposed to get them. A lot of them just didn't though.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Oh, yeah.
What's the benefits of using neem oil
Is it beneficial to use neem oil?
versus chemicals?
There's still a chemical component, which is the azadirachtin. So it's similar to using these same products. I guess because it comes from a tree, I don't know, I guess it's advertised like it's safer than these products. It's just very similar. I'm not saying it's more dangerous than one or another. But they've taken the active ingredient out and using it as a directant for like commercial producers. But it's pretty much the same.
And soap and water. And spray bottle.
Yeah, that could work. Yeah, there's all kind of home remedies, but again, I just won't recommend them because they're not really labeled for that. And if you're a certified organic operation, you can't really use the soap and water because they don't have a measure for assessing the application rate. So when your inspector comes out, I mean, you don't have to do that in home gardens, but if you have somebody coming out to inspect your process, if you use one of these home remedies, they don't really have a way to say that they're safe or not safe. And so they generally won't let a certified organic producer use those processes. Yes?
I have a question. When can we start planting strawberries?
Last October. You can plant them whenever you have them.
So can we like plant them this month? Would it hurt?
No, it won't hurt them. You want to mulch them in so they don't have as much weed pressure. So planting them last fall, they go through winter and they're allowed to set roots down before they have a lot of weed pressure coming in. Because the weeds stop growing in October, November. Hopefully they stop growing then. So putting them in this time of year, there's going to be more weed pressure. So you got to be really diligent about weeding and making sure that the weeds stay out from around them so they can develop. Or use a thick mulch like straw or something like that. Shredded paper works. But you just don't want the strawberry plant to have to compete with the weed plants because the strawberry plant will lose generally.
Can you plant them in a flower pot or do you have to plant them like a certain spot?
You can plant them in flower pots. Yeah, there's a lot of vertical gardens now where they've got containers with holes around them, and you put little strawberry plants in them. But you can grow them in a little flower pot at home, and they're a lot easier to manage. You just, your production is based on how many plants you can actually plant. So a small container is only going to give you a few a week. So you'll enjoy that flavor, but you just won't get big baskets of strawberries. What's that? Yeah. And if you're growing the everbearing, they'll have fewer flowers, so you'll just get one or two over the season throughout the year. But those are becoming more common because people want to see that longer term production instead of a short window where you get them all in at once. All right, well, I appreciate y'all's attention and being patient through this evening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Lisa and the crew have my contact. Y'all are welcome to reach out to me directly. Or Lisa can get with me and I can make sure to answer your questions that way too. And if you're ever in Berea, give us a shout and we'll go to lunch with you or something.